Hey guys, so I hope you're enjoying listening to our guest speakers, and today Jacob and I we are back with another podcast continuing with the series Crash Course. So today we are talking about epistemic responsibility. So what is epistemic responsibility? So before getting into that, let's know what is epistemology. So what it means, it is the theory of knowledge. It is the philosophy based on what we know and how things happen around us and our knowledge. So Jacob will be helping us to know more about it, and he is going to take some references from the book of Antony Flew, and it's going to help us to understand more about this. So over to you, Jacob.
Right. So in this, it's like a speech after a break of getting on with the guests. We are back with this podcast. Fear not. After this podcast, we'll be having some more guests feature on. So we have a huge array of amazing thinkers, philosophers, and authors joining us. So as Piyush said, we are responding to crash course video of conspiracy theories and anti-vaxxers. That is video title, and they're talking about epistemic responsibility. So before that, epistemology, as Piyush said, is the theory of knowledge. It's a study of how we know what we know. And ontology is a study of that which we know. For example, ontology concerning God would be the study of his nature. Who is he, what is his nature, what is his attributes. Epistemology would be the study of how do we know the things that we know about God. Like we say God is omniscient. So how did we know that? So that is what epistemology is about. And epistemic responsibility is the responsibility that we have towards that which we hold, towards the beliefs that we hold. So in this video, Crash Course goes on to show that people like anti-vaxxers who opposed vaccination because they thought that vaccination gives way to autism, a scientific paper that was later disavowed by the community of science given the evidence that came up. So they say that anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists, they all commit the sin of epistemic responsibility, where they fail to adhere to epistemic responsibility. And what they mean by that is they hold on to beliefs that do not have sufficient evidence. So right now, when we say epistemic responsibility, it may look like it's a brand new field we're talking about, but we've seen it over and over. Given the fact that we are addressing theism and atheism as such, we already know that this is something that we've been addressing for so long, and this is what atheism and theism is all about. Is there evidence for what we believe? Atheists say there isn't any evidence for belief in God. So that is where epistemic responsibility all focus in on. And in the video, the speaker of Crash Course says that, reference to an earlier philosopher, he says that religions don't have sufficient evidence and we commit the sin of not holding the true beliefs that we have. So I grant the fact that epistemic responsibility is crucial and that we need to stabilize or standardize our beliefs only on that which has sufficient evidence. Because as they rightly put, our beliefs can impact our actions, and our beliefs will permeate the cultural fabric and will permeate into other people's heart with the way we deal about it with our actions, and can often be damaging to ourselves. So epistemic responsibility is absolutely true. But one interesting point, one diversion I would like to make right now is, Crash Course talks that epistemic responsibility commits the error of, it is sometimes when people don't hold on to epistemic responsibility, they are doing that which is immoral. So you have a moral responsibility to hold on to beliefs that have sufficient evidence. So I would like to ask Crash Course, that is strong support of atheism, on what basis is that morally binding? On what standard can they say that we have the moral obligation to believe that which has sufficient evidence?
Yeah.
So this is something that Dr. Frank Turek in his book Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case, where he points out 6 aspects. He has given the acronym of crimes, starting from creation to science, where he says that atheists can make a case against God only if they borrow or if they steal concepts from God. So morality or logic or rationality, all of this find their most fundamental and sincere founding in God himself, and they have to borrow these concepts from God to make a case against God. So this is that fault that which Crash Course does when they say that epistemic responsibility is a moral obligation. And so what we're going to do in today's podcast, we're going to show what about people who sincerely and wholeheartedly follow the truth. Where do they end up? Is it the case that people who are sincere and wholehearted in their approach will always end up as atheists? Does it mean that theism has no evidence of its own? Now we have shown in the previous podcast where we have shown some of the evidence for God. We're talking about intelligent design and the teleological argument, shown how evolution fails to credit for the origin and the sustenance of human species. you're talking about the fine-tuning of the universe, you're talking about some of the moral arguments for God, and we'll be having some more of it coming on later on. So, right now what we're going to look at, as you have seen from the title, we're talking about epistemic responsibility and Anthony Flew. So now we'll be focusing on who was Anthony Flew. Who is this name that we have referenced in the title? What does he have to do with epistemic responsibility? So Anthony Flew, it is not a name that is quite familiar to us because it's a highly academic name, and he was an atheist, and I would say yes, he was an atheist. That is where we're going to focus on. So right now for us, we are more familiar with Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, or maybe some of us might be familiar with Daniel Dennett or Victor Stenger or Wolpert. So these are the people who are known as the new atheists. They came up in the 21st century, from the year 2006, roughly on that year onwards. They started writing books. They got huge media publicity because most of them wrote on the back of what happened in 9/11, and they said that this is what religion does. This religion is highly toxic. It intoxicates everything that it deals with. So that's why we are familiar with this common household names. But there are other people who are in the field of philosophy who are also atheists, whom we are not familiar with. And these are people who do proper structural work in philosophy and as such. Some of us might be familiar with the name Bertrand Russell, a philosopher who was a strong proponent of atheism, but he too was more on the publicity side. So Anthony Flew is the man who set the agenda for atheism in the 20th century. That's how critical he is to atheism. So Anthony Flew, hear it again, Anthony Flew is the man who set the agenda for atheism in the 20th century onwards. And his publication, Theology and Falsification, that was first presented in the Socrates Club, that was then chaired by the great C.S. Lewis. And that publication became the most widely printed philosophical publication for the next 50 years. Wow. That was how critical his contribution was. And that was just not one paper. More than 30 of his publications have been mass widely reprinted and republished. So that is who Anthony Flew is.
So Jacob, do you know any background of Anthony Flew that led him into atheism?
Yeah, so Anthony Flew was born and brought up in a Christian home. He attended a Christian school, and he was a son of a preacher. So his dad was part of Merton College, Oxford, and he was a minister of religion in the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And also he served as the tutor in New Testament studies at the Methodist Theological College in Cambridge. So that is where Anthony Flew was born and brought up. And Anthony Flew recalls that he cannot pinpoint how and when exactly he started moving away from the faith, but there were points when going to church, taking part in the service was all a bit redundant and banal to him, didn't mean much to him. And about by the age of 13 or so, he started veering off from faith because he didn't feel that personal connection with what Christianity embodied. So that is the background of Anthony Flew. And then he went on to do Oxford, to do philosophy, and that's how he got into philosophy. Now, getting back to who Anthony Flew and what his contribution specifically was, as I mentioned, these new atheists or people like Bertrand Russell, they aren't actually philosophically, pioneers, maybe in that sense, I would be right, philosophical pioneers of atheism. Because if you look at David Hume or Friedrich Nietzsche, they contributed a structure of philosophy, an academic propagation of philosophy in that particular field. But if you look like people at Bertrand Russell, or even the new atheists that I mentioned, Richard Dawkins, late Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Victor Stenger, Wolpert, all of them, they have written publications or write-ups or articles. They haven't contributed anything new. They have stirred some conversation, they have stirred the audience to think about it, but they haven't contributed anything structurally or academic in that field. But Anthony Flew is quite diverse. And like I said, the reason that we call Anthony Flew to be, or as the book calls him, a notorious atheist in his autobiography, or the reason that we say that he was the man who set the agenda for atheism, the reason is, in his writing in 1950 when he published Theology and Falsification, he challenged the meaningfulness of any claims of religion. So he said that religious claims do not have any meaning in themselves, and he called what is memorably known as death by 1,000 qualifications. So what does a death by 1,000 qualification means? He said that when a religious person makes a claim about God, for example, if you ask this was one of his examples, if you ask a religious person, why did God do something X? Okay, and his response was, and he said that a religious person would say, because God is omniscient, we don't know what was the reason he did it. So a religious person, in trying to defend his beliefs, would keep on adding more and more qualification on it, so much as that belief would become non-falsifiable. So there is no way you can falsify it. Why does God exist? Oh, because He is beyond the universe. We cannot know Him truly, but He exists. So if you say something like that belief system becomes non-falsifiable. And Anthony Flew pointed it out and said, religious beliefs die a death by 1,000 qualifications. So there are these qualifications, these statements that they add on to it, that eventually it becomes worthless. There is no way that you can find the genuinity or the meaningfulness of that claim. And in his next publication, which is known as God and Philosophy, what he showed in that publication was he attacked the claim that God's attributes are coherent. He challenged the view on how God's attributes of being omniscient or omnipotent or omnipresent could be coherent. So he showed in that publication that these attributes are not coherent, these attributes do not make sense in the God of the Bible or in theism as well. And then his next publication, which is known as the Presumption of Atheism, equipped atheism beyond words. He showed that in that publication that the burden of proof was not on the atheist. It is the theist who claims that God exists who has the burden to prove that actually God exists. So the atheist does not have any burden to disprove God. It is the theist who is coming and making claim that God exists, someone who is beyond space, time and matter, or someone who is beyond us is existing, a transcendent being is existing. So the burden on proof is not on the atheist, it's on the theist to show that actually God does exist. So with this critical, and there are many more, but with this critical 3 publications, Anthony Flew attacked theism beyond measure. And theism fell into a big conundrum at that point because no one had looked into these perspectives. And these were not attacks on if God exists, why evil, or these age-old ones, or attacks against the miracles or resurrection of Jesus. These were attacks at the fundamental of what it means to be theist, at the fundamental ideology of what theism is all about. And this is what sets apart Anthony Flew from some of the most popular common household names of atheists that we come to know about. And what in turn these questions that Anthony Flew raises was, it brought back into the mainstream the conversations about God, and it ignited that intellectual discourse about what it means to be theism and the defense of theism. And this gave form to the rise of some of the greatest Christian philosophers like Alvin Plantinga and Richard Swinburne. So much that a Time magazine cover story in 1980 said, in a quiet revolution in thought and argument that hardly anyone would have foreseen only 2 decades ago, God is making a comeback. Most intriguingly, this is happening in the crisp intellectual circles of academic philosophers. So what Anthony Flew did was, Anthony Flew instigated that conversation all back again. And these whole aspects were not addressed, like at the Time magazine said, these whole aspects were not seen into that much of depth. But when Anthony Flew came out all guns blazing, all of these points were revisited, and people like Alvin Plantinga in his publication like God, Philosophy and Other Minds, I guess, he all came out with strong defense of what theism and Christian theism is. This is who Anthony Flew is. And one thing Anthony Flew is quite famous for is how he dismantled new atheism even before people like Richard Dawkins was born, I guess. Because the claims of new atheism and something that say, you need science to prove everything. This is actually not new. This came in 1920 by a group of philosophers known as the Vienna Circle, and it was propounded by A.J. Ayer. A.J., that is initials, and A.Y.E.R., A.J. Ayer. And they presented what is known as logical positivism. So which means that you can know truth only through science. So it said that science statements of logic and pure mathematics, these are just tautologies, and that is that they were true by definition, or they were simply ways of using symbols that did not express any truth about the world. So they are self-evident, they are self-evident truth claims, and you need not prove anything in particular about logic, science claims and mathematics. So right off the bat you can ask a question back, like, how did you come to know the truth about mathematics or science? Like, how did you come to know that statement which says science and mathematics can only lead you to truth? How do we know that statement is true? Because science and mathematics cannot prove itself true then. So there is that intellectual difficulty with presenting the case for this logical positivism, which, as I mentioned, A.J. Ayer presented in his work Language, Truth and Logic. But this rise of this logical positivism, it said that when someone looks at the history of philosophy, we can see that it came to its end by the 1950s. So Ayer brings out his book in around 1936, and by about 14 years it died on its own. So Anthony Flew, when he mentioned about his theology and falsification paper, he said that he feels that theology and falsification, which also addressed theism, gave an apt response that was enough to be a final nail in the coffin for logical positivism. In so much that Sir Alfred Ayer, a renowned philosopher of atheism, he said that, I think it is full of mistakes. I think it was an important book in its time because it had a kind of cathartic effect. But when you get down to detail, I think it's full of mistakes which I spent the last 50 years correcting or trying to correct. So this is where logical positivism all came out to be. It made a few surgeons through the Vienna Circle and A.J. Ayer, but by 1950 it hit rock bottom. So this is what is logical positivism, and we see this quite frequently. It made a resurgence with the new atheists. But since this was restricted in the academic field, the common public, the common man who was a reader of Richard Dawkins and others, did not know about it. So to that public, to people like us, this was brand new from the area of the new atheist. So new atheism isn't actually anything new, it is refurbished atheism. That's the best way to call it. It just refurbished that which was buried in sense in the philosophical atheistic community. They brought it out against God. So this was who Anthony Flew was. This is the man that we are talking about. Now, where does epistemic responsibility come into term with Anthony Flew? Someone of this stature, someone of this reputation, he has often said that he follows the evidence where it leads, and as these academic philosophers, when they engage in debates, when they review papers, when their papers are peer reviewed, they come to correct their terms. Like I said, Sir A.J. Ayer said that logical positivism had to be corrected. They follow where the evidence and rationale leads, and they end up correcting their position. In 2004, Anthony Flew made a stark claim. He said that he believes that there is a God. And now Anthony Flew, the man who set the agenda for atheism in the last century, he came to a conclusion of deism. And he said what caused him to what caused him to shift from atheism to deism was the insurmountable evidence that he saw from fine-tuning and intelligent design. He said that scientific evidence was too overwhelming, that he must come to terms with an intelligent creator behind the universe.
Wow.
So that is clarity, because for the common man who is listening to this, imagine what would it mean if Richard Dawkins comes and says, I believe there is a God. I mean, that would turn the world upside down.
Yeah.
That is exactly what happened in the academic field and among the thinkers when Anthony Flew came up and said that there is a God. Now, what I want to bring to your attention is, how did the atheistic community respond to what Anthony Flew did? And let me just quickly go through the statement of Richard Dawkins when he responded to what was happening with Anthony Flew. So Richard Dawkins goes on and says that about Bertrand Russell. He says that Bertrand Russell was an exaggeratedly fair-minded atheist, over-eager to be disillusioned if logic seemed to require it. So he gives that sort of highlighting in a way who Bertrand Russell and his mindset was. And then he goes on to say in the footnote, we might be seeing something similar today in the over-publicized tergiversation, which is apostasy or going back away from your faith, tergiversation of the philosopher Anthony Flew, who announced in his old age that he had been converted to belief in some sort of deity, triggering a frenzy of eager repetition all around the internet. On the other hand, Russell was a great philosopher. Russell won the Nobel Prize. So what Richard Dawkins is trying to say is that, so he is attacking Anthony Flu's credibility. He's going for ad hominem fallacy, where he is attacking the credibility of the person rather than the beliefs themselves. So he is saying, Russell won the Nobel Prize. Russell is a great philosopher. But look at Anthony Flew. He went away from atheism in his old age. So it was a senile comment against Anthony Flew, saying that you cannot trust what Anthony Flew is saying. Why? Because he's old. Maybe that's why he changed his belief system.
Yeah.
So something that Richard Dawkins and others would often critique of religion is that they say that religion hates apostasy, or religion goes after those who disbelieve, those who have doubt, and religion mocks the people who disbelieve in it. And that is something exactly that Richard Dawkins is doing. He's saying that you cannot believe what Anthony Flew is saying. Why? Because he's old. He's an old man. He's a crackpot now. He might have gone back from his statement from the faith of the fathers of atheism because he now believes in God. So what is the atheistic community doing? Are they really truly being seekers of truth? Are they actually being free thinkers? Are they following the evidence where it leads? Because when Anthony Flew followed the evidence where it leads, the atheistic community wasn't welcoming them with open arms.
Yeah, they're just rather like, trying to deliberately defend the community from Anthony Fluke's
from Anthony Fluke's state. And so they want to show that there is nothing credible to what Anthony Flew is saying. There is nothing credible to Anthony Fluke's work. And something that came out very strongly was in 2007, this book that I have, Anthony Fluke's autobiography, There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. So Anthony Flew was in his old age. So some of the editorial part, the final editing work, they were all done with the help of Roy Abraham Varghese. And this is not some Roy Abraham Varghese guy. This is a guy who has been actively involved in philosophy, in holding conventions, conferences, publications, an active person involved in this academia. So Roy Abraham Varghese helped Anthony Flew put together Anthony Fluke's original writing into the book. So he gives an introduction to who Anthony Flew was and how the philosophical area was set during Anthony Fluke's time. And he also gives at the end a small paper against atheism, by referring to consciousness, awareness, logic, and how all of this point away from atheism. So, but Anthony Flew came out critically and he put it bluntly that, no, this book is my actual work. I wrote the content. And because of my age, Roy Abraham Varghese helped me put together some of the parts together with the editorial as such. But this is my original content.
It's like thoughts are mine, but handwriting is his.
Yeah, exactly. So Anthony Flew clarified that this is his original work because what the atheists were trying to say is that this is Roy Abraham Varghese writing. This is not Anthony Flew. He just took Anthony Fluke's name and he published his Anthony Fluke's name. But Anthony Flew clearly and crisply said that this is exactly what my work is. This is exactly what I have come to conclude is. So what you are seeing is staunch rebellion to where the truth leads. They hate the truth. And Jesus says that the people who are in the darkness do not want to come to light.
Yeah.
They love the darkness because the light will expose their deeds. And that is what you see with modern atheists. And Crash Course cannot in any way ridicule theism or religion, and specifically Christian theism, because that is what we are defending, cannot ridicule Christian theist or Christian theism of committing a dishonest commitment to epistemic responsibility. The failure of epistemic responsibility is most seen in the atheistic community. Granted, there might be Christian people, Christian thinkers who might feel that you must believe in things on your own. You must believe even though there isn't any absolute proof for it.
So, absolute proof. What does it mean?
There are two proofs that we use. One is absolute proof and practical proof. So let me just highlight what this means. A practical proof is that which you know by the name suggests practically. Absolute proof is that which helps you to know something absolutely certainly.
Okay.
So an example. So
practical is like what we see and what we observe around us. Or?
Yes. Yes. Something that we can know from a practical life. So one thing you need to know is that you cannot know anything absolutely in this world. We may come close to it. There might be points we come close to it, but we cannot know anything absolutely. Here's what it means. Piyush, do you know absolutely everything of your parents?
No.
No.
Because I was born around like after
19 years ago, 18 years ago?
Yeah, 18 years ago, and that time they were around 28, 27. So I don't know the past, I know after that.
Yeah, and also you may know some of the events that have happened, but you don't know how they came to those events, what was going through their mind.
Yes.
So someone would say, well, I know absolutely about my spouse, we've been living together. But let me use one example. For example, Mr. X is brought to the court for a crime. Okay. The wife can say, I don't believe my husband would do that. He's a loving man. But the wife does not have absolute proof to say that he didn't do it. She has practical proof. She can say, this is some of the incidents that happened in our life. This is how he helped other people. This is what his commitment was. This is how he sees the world and other humans. That would be practical proof. But absolute proof would be when they do the investigation and they come to the conclusion that Mr. X was nowhere near the crime scene. So now we have absolute proof that he was not there at the crime event. Okay. So like I said, absolute proof is something that is very hard to reach. We cannot get absolute proof in everything. Like in this example, after thorough investigation, they came to the conclusion that now we have absolute proof but Mr. X was not in the case. Now, there might be many questions that might be raised about where Mr. X was or his involvement. And it is not possible for us to answer every single objection to an incident. For example, the prosecution can bring out every single conceivable objection against to Mr. X was. But the bulk of the evidence would point to that Mr. X was not towards the crime scene. They can bring out objections. Only if you are able to answer every conceivable objection against statement or a fact can we say that it is absolutely proved. Now we use the term absolutely proved because we have got a majority of evidence or a fair convincing amount of evidence, so we use the term absolute proof. But that is not what it means in the essence itself. And we have practical proof of that that we believe. For example, right now, all of us might be an effect of a dream that is happening in some scientist's mind who's undergoing experimentation. I mean, is that possible? Yes, it is possible. But the question is that plausible? Is that rational? Is that logical to think so? No, it's not. Because we don't have practical proof leading towards it.
Yeah.
Now, all we can give towards it is practical proof. There are philosophical arguments that prove to us that our existence is real, that we are actually existing, and this is not a mirage. But those are all giving practical proof from the life that we live, or from our conscience, or from the pain that we suffer, from all practical proof. Absolute proof is quite hard to present. So, with our belief system, with theism, atheism, or whatever be it, we have practical proof from where we have to make a conclusion towards it. Which is why some people are agnostic. They say that we don't have enough evidence to make a conclusion. Fair enough. If they are honest and sincere about it, then they can do further investigation and come to a conclusion. You have to make do with the evidence that you have. That's how we do in real life. Everyone makes does with the practical proof that they have. No one can wait for absolute proof. Like we have mentioned earlier in one of the podcasts about the speed of light. We do not know with absolute certainty whether the speed of light has changed or not. We take it with the practical evidence that we have that the speed of light has not changed. And hence science progresses with that manner. But further investigation is still going on from the Max Planck Institute in Germany, which shows that maybe the speed of light might have changed from the initial point of the universe, 10 to the power negative 43 seconds right after the Big Bang, when there was a change in the speed of light, and then it has been constant. But we don't have absolute proof yet. We need to keep investigating.
Yeah.
And that is where
there are even some investigations that near the black hole, speed of light increases. So because there's a strong gravitational pull. Yeah.
Okay, but still, has there any been absolute proof?
No proof.
Still practical proof. So that is what comes to with epistemic responsibility. We have to take into account practical proof of what we believe and how we come to that conclusion. So what I want to present to our audience is that, like we mentioned Pascal's wager earlier about weighing the option once again and seeing.
Yeah.
As C.S. Lewis said, if Christianity is false, it is of no importance. But if Christianity is true, it is of utmost importance. And you can say the same thing about Islam. If Islam is false, it is of no importance. But if Islam is true, it is of utmost importance. So you need to evaluate the evidence and see where the evidence leads. And it will surely lead you to truth if you honestly, sincerely, like Anthony Flew, like other people who sincerely analyze the evidence. And I don't know what will happen to an atheist who sincerely tries to figure out what is the evidence that before him. I am not a judge of him, but I can encourage everyone to sincerely follow the evidence. Be true to your heart, and everyone will truly know whether they're true or not.
Yeah.
And one thing I can assure you is, do not expect atheists to be welcoming of you if you follow the evidence truthfully. Because if they see that you're going with the evidence away from atheism, just like Richard Dawkins, the poster child of new atheism, just like Richard Dawkins, they will revert to ridiculing you.
So, thank you, Jacob, for helping us to know more and enlightening us about this epistemic responsibility. I would like to challenge all our listeners to go back and hear the evidence of our faith once again. Those podcasts will help you to know the truth, and then when people will try to challenge our faith, you can still use them to defend Christianity. So, Jacob, any plans for the next podcast?
The next podcast is something that we want all the parents to listen to it. The next podcast is about how parents can impact their high school students. We're not talking about college students, we're talking about the young teenage from 8 years onwards. How parents can help their kids, not even parents, the young pastors, youth ministers, how they can help such young kids know the rationality and the coherence of the Christian faith. So tune in, like I said, we've got a huge set of speakers coming up, and keep tuning for the next podcast.
So, Jacob, do you want to tell our listeners about the guest speaker who will be speaking on this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let me stop you right there. I think it would be good if we keep it a suspense.
Right.
And stay tuned on our social media sites as we'll be disclosing the name very soon. Yeah. Thank you for listening to us once again, and hope we have helped you learn more and gain more knowledge. Thank you, Jacob. So please like, share, and subscribe. This is Ankit signing off.